Admiral Kethvar stood on the bridge of the Sovereign Draft, watching the blue world slowly rotate beneath them. After 3 millennia of conquest, first contact scenarios had become routine. His tactical analysts had already provided their assessment. Primitive chemical-based technology, no energy shields, no plasma weapons, no faster-than-light capability. The inhabitants were still burning fossil fuels and splitting atoms for power. By Zephyrian standards, they were barely past the Stone Age. The planet's designation was Sol 3, though intercepted communications revealed the natives called it Earth. Intelligence reports showed a fractured civilization of competing nation-states, constantly engaged in small-scale conflicts using what the Zephyrians generously classified as kinetic toys. Their most advanced aircraft couldn't even break their own atmosphere without chemical rockets, and their ships still floated on actual water like primitive vessels from Zephyria's own ancient history. "Sir," reported Navigation Officer Veldar, "we have completed our orbital survey. Population approximately 7 billion across multiple continents. No unified planetary government. Technology level indicates they achieved nuclear fission roughly 80 standard years ago." Kethvar's mandibles clicked in what humans might have recognized as amusement. Nuclear fission. The Zephyrians had mastered fusion 3,000 years before they even left their homeworld. This would be over in days, possibly hours. Communications broadcast the standard surrender demand on all frequencies. Make sure it's translated into their primary languages. The message was simple and had been refined over centuries of use. Citizens of Sol 3, you are now within the sphere of the Zephyrian Empire. Surrender immediately, and your transition to imperial rule will be peaceful. Resistance will result in the complete sterilization of your world. You have 72 hours to comply. What happened next will be discussed in tactical academies for generations to come, assuming any academies survived what was about to unfold. The first response came not from any government, but from what appeared to be individual civilians using primitive electromagnetic communications. The translations made little sense. "Come and take it, Molenlabe, you picked the wrong planet," and strangely multiple references to something called 1776. Then, the formal responses arrived. Instead of the expected immediate surrender, every major nation on the planet sent essentially the same message. A polite but firm refusal, followed by what could only be described as a threat. The United States response was typical. "We respectfully decline your offer and suggest you reconsider your position. We recommend you review your intelligence data more carefully." Kethvar was genuinely puzzled. In 3,000 years of expansion, no species had ever suggested the Zephyrians had made an error in their intelligence gathering. Their tactical analysis was legendary in its precision. What could these primitives possibly know about warfare that had escaped the notice of the galaxy's most successful conquerors? "Sir," his intelligence officer interrupted his thoughts, "we're detecting massive communications activity across the planet. It appears to be coordinated." "Show me." The holographic display materialized above the command console, showing Earth's electromagnetic spectrum alive with activity. Military communications, civilian networks, even primitive satellites were suddenly buzzing with coordinated traffic. It was unlike anything in their database, a planet-wide mobilization happening in real time. "How long since we sent the surrender demand?" Kethvar asked. "For hours, sir. For hours." Most species took weeks or months to even begin organizing a response. The quick ones managed it in days. But these humans appeared to be coordinating a global response in mere hours. "What are they doing down there?" he muttered. His tactical officer, a veteran of 43 planetary conquests, enhanced the sensor display. "Sir, we're detecting movement of military assets on every continent. Their naval vessels are putting to sea, aircraft are being dispersed from major installations, and their ground forces appear to be, sir, this is unprecedented." "Explain." "They're not massing for a traditional defense, sir. They're scattering, dispersing into small units, and disappearing into their urban centers and terrain features. It's almost like they're preparing for The officer paused, reviewing his readings. Guerrilla warfare, sir. Planet-wide guerrilla warfare. Kethvar's four eyes narrowed. Guerrilla warfare was a theoretical concept in Zephyrian military doctrine, but it had never been successfully employed against them. The logistics alone should be impossible. A primitive species couldn't possibly coordinate such tactics on a global scale without advanced communications, which these humans clearly lacked. Yet the evidence was right in front of him. Sir, the communications officer called out, we're receiving another transmission from the planet. It's from someone claiming to represent the United Nations Security Council. Put it through. The hologram shifted to show a human female in formal attire, sitting in what appeared to be a large assembly hall. Behind her sat representatives from dozens of nations, their faces grim but determined. She spoke in clear, measured tones that suggested this wasn't panic, but careful preparation. I'm Secretary General Maria Santos. On behalf of the people of Earth, I want to make our position absolutely clear. We have received your ultimatum, and we reject it completely. We also want you to understand something about our species that your intelligence gathering may have missed. She paused, and Kethvar noticed that every human in the background was looking directly into the camera with expressions he had learned to associate with extreme determination. We have been at war with each other for our entire recorded history. Not occasional conflicts, not territorial disputes, but constant, evolving, brutal warfare. We have perfected the art of killing over 10,000 years of practice. We have weapons you cannot imagine and tactics your databases have never encountered. We know how to fight from the shadows, how to turn every civilian into a combatant, how to make our own terrain into a weapon against invaders. Her voice never wavered, never showed a hint of fear. You have conquered species that had centuries or millennia of peace before you arrived. You have never fought a species that learned warfare before they learned agriculture. You have never faced a planet where every citizen has studied the military history of their world as part of their basic education. And you have certainly never fought a species that has spent decades preparing for exactly this scenario. The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in stunned silence. Sir, his intelligence officer said quietly, I'm detecting something else. We've been monitoring their information networks, and they've been sharing detailed tactical manuals on asymmetric warfare, documents on improvised explosives, urban combat, resource denial, communications disruption. Sir, they've been teaching each other how to fight us. For how long? Based on the data timestamps, sir, decades. They've been preparing for alien invasion for over 50 years. Kethvar stared at the blue world below, a cold realization beginning to form in his mind. Every other species they had conquered had been forced to learn warfare against the Zephyrians. These humans had been learning warfare against each other for millennia, and had spent the last several decades specifically preparing to fight an alien invader. Tactical assessment, he ordered, though he was beginning to suspect he might not like the answer. Sir, if their claims are accurate, we may be facing a completely unprecedented scenario. Our standard conquest protocols assume a species with limited military experience fighting a defensive war on their home territory. These humans appear to have extensive military experience, detailed knowledge of our capabilities from studying our previous conquests, and they're not fighting a defensive war. What do you mean? Sir, they're not trying to protect their cities or their governments. They're trying to destroy us. Every tactical indicator suggests they view this as a war of extermination rather than a conquest. They're not mobilizing to defend, they're mobilizing to attack. Kethvar considered this. In 3,000 years, the Zephyrians had never faced a species that approached conflict with extermination as the primary goal. Other species fought to protect their civilization, their culture, their way of life. These humans seemed prepared to burn their own world to ash if it meant taking their enemies with them. Sir, the sensor operator called out, I'm detecting unusual energy signatures from the planet's surface. Show me. The display highlighted dozens of locations across the planet where energy output was suddenly spiking. Military installations, research facilities, Even civilian industrial sites were showing massive power draws. What are they building down there? Before anyone could answer, new contacts appeared on the sensor display. Not ships. The humans didn't have ships. But objects were launching from the planet's surface. Hundreds of them. Small, fast, and flying in patterns that made no tactical sense. Sir, these appear to be some kind of missile system, but the flight patterns are unconventional. The objects weren't flying toward the Zephyrian fleet. Instead, they were dispersing throughout the solar system, taking positions near asteroids, gas giant moons, and other celestial bodies. What are they doing? Ketvar demanded. His tactical officer's voice was tight with uncertainty. Sir, I believe they're mining the entire solar system. Mining? Creating a battlefield, sir. They're positioning weapons throughout their system. If we try to maneuver, we'll be moving through a maze of prepared kill zones. Kethvar stared at the tactical display as hundreds more objects launched from Earth. The humans weren't just defending their planet. They were turning their entire solar system into a weapon. And they had done it in 4 hours. For the first time in his career, Admiral Kethvar began to suspect that his intelligence data might have been incomplete. These weren't primitives with kinetic toys. These were apex predators who had been sharpening their claws for millennia. And they had been expecting company. The 72-hour ultimatum expired not with surrender, but with silence. No transmissions, no negotiations, no desperate pleas for mercy. The humans had simply vanished from communications. Their cities still glowed with artificial light. Their aircraft still moved through their atmosphere, but the organized chatter that had marked their first response was gone. Admiral Kethvar had seen this before. Species sometimes went silent in their final hours, paralyzed by fear or resignation. He ordered the standard bombardment to begin, precision strikes against military installations, government centers, and communication hubs. Within 6 hours, the human capacity for organized resistance should be eliminated. The first wave of Zephyrian attack craft descended through Earth's atmosphere, expecting minimal opposition. What they found instead was a masterclass in what humans called asymmetric warfare. The attack began conventionally enough. 12 Zephyrian strike cruisers targeted major military installations across Earth. Washington, D.C., Moscow, Beijing, London, Tel Aviv, all the primary command centers that should have housed the human leadership. The plasma bombardment was precise, overwhelming, and completely ineffective. The installations were empty. Not abandoned. Empty. Evacuated so completely that the Zephyrians were essentially destroying vacant buildings, while the real military infrastructure had relocated to positions their sensors couldn't detect. Sir, reported Strike Commander Zethlon from his lead cruiser. Primary targets are abandoned. No resistance, no personnel, no equipment. It's like they knew exactly where we would strike first. They had known. Every major military power on Earth had studied the Zephyrian conquest patterns for decades. They knew the invaders would target command and control first, followed by industrial capacity, then population centers. The humans had simply left, moved everything that mattered to places the Zephyrians couldn't find. But that was only the beginning. As the Zephyrian strike force began searching for secondary targets, the humans revealed why they had spent decades studying alien invasion scenarios. The attack came from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. A Zephyrian cruiser passing over the Rocky Mountains suddenly found itself under fire from weapons that shouldn't exist. Not from military installations or government facilities, but from civilian hunters using modified sporting rifles that somehow penetrated military-grade shielding. The weapons weren't advanced. They were simply designed by a species that had been perfecting the art of killing for 10,000 years. Another cruiser over the Amazon rainforest discovered that every tree could conceal a human with intimate knowledge of guerrilla warfare tactics. The Vietnamese had taught them about tunnel systems, the Afghans had taught them about improvised explosives, and the Irish had taught them about urban warfare. The humans hadn't just studied these tactics, they had improved them. But The real shock came when the Zephyrians realized the humans weren't just hiding from the invasion. They were hunting their attackers. Squadron leader Krell was investigating a distress signal from a downed reconnaissance craft when his entire unit was systematically eliminated by what appeared to be a single human operative. The engagement lasted 4 minutes and left no survivors except Krell himself, who was found 3 days later with a concussion and a handwritten note in perfect Zephyrian script. "Give this to your admiral. We know where you sleep." Inside the note was a detailed schematic of the Sovereign's wrath, including deck plans, security protocols, and the location of Admiral Kethvar's personal quarters. Information that should have been impossible for any human to obtain. But humans, it turned out, were very good at impossible things. How did they get this? Kethvar demanded, studying the schematic that was accurate down to the smallest detail. His intelligence chief, Commander Nathvel, had been asking himself the same question. "Sir, we've monitored every transmission from the planet. There's been no communication with our ships, no data breaches, no security compromises. Yet somehow they have detailed intelligence on our vessel configuration." What the Zephyrians didn't understand was that humans approached intelligence gathering the same way they approached warfare, by assuming their enemies were smart, capable, and dangerous. For decades, human military strategists had reverse-engineered Zephyrian technology from battlefield debris left behind on conquered worlds. They had analyzed attack patterns, studied ship designs, and built detailed models of Zephyrian military doctrine. When the invasion fleet had arrived, human scientists had 12 hours to analyze their energy signatures, weapon systems, and ship construction before the ultimatum was delivered. 12 hours was enough for a species that had been preparing for this exact scenario since they first detected radio signals from outside their solar system. The humans hadn't just been teaching each other guerrilla warfare for 50 years. They had been building weapons. Strike Commander Zephlon learned this the hard way when his cruiser was targeted by what human military records would later classify as a kinetic penetrator. To the Zephyrians, it looked like a simple metallic projectile fired from the planet's surface. No plasma, no energy weapons, no advanced technology. Just a tungsten rod, 3 meters long and half a meter wide, accelerated to 17 kilometers per second and guided by systems that made it impossible to intercept. When it struck Zephlon's cruiser, the kinetic energy was equivalent to a small nuclear weapon. The ship didn't explode. It simply ceased to exist, converting instantly from a functioning warship to an expanding cloud of superheated debris. "Sir," reported the tactical officer, his voice tight with disbelief, "the humans are using projectile weapons against our fleet." "Projectile weapons?" Kethvar was incredulous. "What kind of projectile can penetrate military shielding?" "Sir, it's not penetrating the shields. It's going through them. The shields are designed to deflect energy weapons and charge particles. These projectiles are just dense metal moving at extreme velocity. The shields don't register them as threats." It was elegant in its simplicity. The Zephyrians had spent 3 millennia perfecting defenses against energy weapons, plasma cannon, and directed energy attacks. They had never encountered a species primitive enough to use kinetic weapons, but sophisticated enough to make them devastatingly effective. The humans had turned their technological inferiority into a tactical advantage. But the kinetic strikes were just the opening move. As more Zephyrian ships fell to weapons that shouldn't have been able to harm them, Admiral Kethvar began to realize that his enemy wasn't just technologically inferior. They were tactically superior. Every engagement followed the same pattern. The Zephyrians would approach what appeared to be a legitimate target, only to discover it was bait for a trap they hadn't seen coming. Humans had been fighting each other for so long that they had developed an intuitive understanding of military psychology. They knew what targets would seem valuable to an invader, they knew how to make those targets irresistible, and they knew exactly how to punish anyone who took the bait. A Zephyrian assault team investigating a research facility in Switzerland found themselves in a carefully prepared kill zone where every building, every street corner, and every piece of terrain had been optimized for defensive warfare. The facility was real. It was CERN, one of humanity's premier scientific installations. But it had been evacuated, mined with explosives, and converted into an elaborate trap that eliminated an entire Zephyrian battalion, while civilian scientists watched via hidden cameras from positions 50 kilometers away. The humans weren't just defending their territory. They were teaching their enemies that every step forward would cost more than the ground was worth. "Sir," his communications officer reported, "we're receiving a transmission from the planet. Audio only." The voice that came through the speakers was calm, professional, and spoke in flawless Zephyrian. "Admiral Kethvar, this is General Sarah Chun, commanding the Terran Defense Force. I believe we need to talk." Kethvar's mandibles clicked in frustration. "How do you know my name?" "The same way we knew you would target our command centers first, the same way we knew your ships were vulnerable to kinetic weapons, and the same way we know you've lost 12 ships in the last 18 hours. We've been studying you for a very long time, Admiral. The question is, are you ready to start studying us?" There was a pause before she continued. "You've spent 3,000 years conquering species that learned warfare from you. We learned warfare from each other. You fought civilizations that had centuries of peace before you arrived. We've never had peace. You've conquered species that viewed combat as a necessary evil. We view combat as art form." Her voice remained steady, but there was something in her tone that Kethvar recognized from his own veteran officers. The absolute confidence of someone who had seen every form of violence imaginable and had not just survived but excelled. "Your standard conquest protocols assume you're fighting a species trying to preserve their civilization. We're not trying to preserve anything, Admiral. We're trying to perfect our craft. And you just gave us the ultimate test case." The transmission ended, leaving Kethvar staring at his tactical display where red symbols marked 12 lost ships. More losses than he had suffered in his entire previous career combined. For the first time in 3,000 years of conquest, the Zephyrian Empire had encountered a species that wasn't fighting to survive. They were fighting to win. Admiral Kethvar made the decision that would haunt Zephyrian military doctrine for generations. He requested reinforcements. In 3 millennia of conquest, the Zephyrian Empire had never needed to send additional forces to complete a planetary subjugation. The initial invasion fleet was always sufficient. Earth will be different. The request went up the chain of command to Fleet Admiral Morgeth, Supreme Commander of the Zephyrian Navy. Morgeth's response was swift and brutal. Complete the conquest immediately or face court-martial for incompetence. No additional ships would be sent to deal with what the High Command considered a routine operation against a primitive species. Kethvar found himself in an impossible position. His forces were already stretched thin. He had lost 15% of his fleet to weapons that shouldn't have been able to harm them, and his enemy was displaying tactical sophistication that defied every analysis of their technological capabilities. Worse, the humans were learning faster than his forces could adapt. The pattern became clear after the disaster at what humans called Hurricane Point, a seemingly insignificant military installation in the American state of Florida. Intelligence indicated it was a communication hub that, if destroyed, would disrupt human coordination in the southeastern region of their largest continent. 3 full squadrons of Zephyrian assault craft approached the facility, expecting minimal resistance from what appeared to be a small coastal base. What they found instead was a demonstration of why humans had dominated their own planet's warfare for thousands of years. The facility was real, functional, and completely deserted except for a single human in military uniform sitting at a communications console. As the Zephyrian forces approached, this individual began broadcasting in clear Zephyrian. "Welcome to Earth, Admiral. I'm Colonel James Morrison, United States Marine Corps. I've been waiting for you." Squadron leader Vextar, commanding the assault force, was puzzled by the lack of defenses. "Human, you are ordered to surrender immediately." Morrison's response was a smile that somehow managed to be both friendly and terrifying. "I'm afraid I can't do that, Colonel. You see, this facility isn't just a communication hub. It's also a demonstration. A demonstration of what? Of why you should have studied our history more carefully. Morrison pressed a single button on his console. The ocean erupted. What the Zephyrians had not detected, because their sensors were calibrated for advanced technology rather than primitive ingenuity, were the submarine-launched ballistic missiles hiding in the waters around the facility. Not nuclear weapons. Humans had learned that nuclear warfare was too indiscriminate for precise tactical objectives. These were kinetic kill vehicles, each one guided by technology reverse-engineered from Zephyrian navigation systems and powered by human engineering that prioritized function over elegance. 12 missiles, each carrying a dozen tungsten penetrators, rose from the water in perfect coordination. The Zephyrians had less than 30 seconds to react to weapons that moved faster than their shields could track and hit harder than their armor could absorb. When the engagement was over, 3 full squadrons of Zephyrian assault craft had been reduced to falling debris, and Colonel Morrison was still sitting at his console, calmly updating his superiors on the success of the operation. Hurricane Point to command, he reported, demonstration complete. Enemy casualties, 36 attack craft, approximately 400 personnel. Our casualties, 0. Facility remains operational. Squadron leader Vextar, one of only 3 survivors, was recovered from the ocean by human rescue teams. As he was pulled from the water, barely conscious and suffering from severe plasma burns, he heard Morrison speaking to the rescue team. Get him medical attention and treat him according to the Geneva Conventions. Then, send him back to his admiral with a message. The message was simple and would become famous throughout the Zephyrian fleet. This is what we do to enemies who underestimate us. Imagine what we do to enemies who threaten our families. But Hurricane Point was just the beginning. The humans had used the engagement to test their tactics and weapons systems against actual Zephyrian forces. What they learned from that single battle reshaped their entire strategic approach. Within 48 hours, human forces began implementing what their military called swarm tactics. Not the simple, overwhelming numbers that other species had attempted, but sophisticated, coordinated attacks that exploited every weakness in Zephyrian military doctrine. The first full-scale demonstration came when Admiral Kethvar ordered a concentrated assault on what intelligence identified as a major industrial center in the human nation of Germany. The target was the Ruhr Valley, a region packed with manufacturing facilities that seemed essential to human war production. The assault force was massive by previous standards: 60 attack craft, 8 cruisers, and 2 heavy destroyers. It should have been enough to level any industrial center on any conquered world. Against the humans, it was exactly what they had been hoping for. The battle began conventionally enough. Zephyrian forces approached in standard formation, preparing to eliminate industrial targets with precision plasma strikes. What they encountered instead was a carefully orchestrated demonstration of human tactical evolution. The first wave of attackers found their targets protected not by energy shields or defensive weapons, but by swarms of what appeared to be primitive aircraft. Hundreds of them, each one piloted by humans who seemed to have no regard for their own survival. These weren't military jets, but civilian aircraft that had been modified with weapons reverse-engineered from captured Zephyrian technology. The aircraft were too small and too numerous for Zephyrian targeting systems to engage efficiently. They swarmed around the much larger Zephyrian ships like angry insects, inflicting damage that individually was negligible, but collectively was devastating. Each aircraft was essentially a piloted missile, designed to cause maximum damage in a single attack before being destroyed. But this was just the opening phase. As Zephyrian forces focused on the aerial swarms, ground-based weapons systems opened fire. Not the simple kinetic weapons from previous engagements, but sophisticated missile systems that had been hidden in civilian buildings, underground installations, and mobile platforms that moved constantly to avoid detection. The humans had learned to weaponize their entire civilization. Strike Commander Neth Joel, leading the assault on a major manufacturing complex, found himself under attack not just from military forces, but from the factory workers themselves. The industrial facility wasn't just producing civilian goods, it was producing weapons designed specifically to kill Zephyrians. And every worker in the facility had been trained to use those weapons. "This is impossible," he transmitted to his wing commander. "Civilians don't engage in military combat. It violates every law of warfare." His wing commander's response was cut short by an explosion that eliminated his entire ship. The civilians had just demonstrated that human laws of warfare were considerably different from Zephyrian expectations. As the battle continued, it became clear that the humans had turned the concept of civilian non-combatants into a strategic weapon. Every human was a potential soldier, every building was a potential fortification, and every piece of technology was a potential weapon. The Zephyrians weren't fighting an army. They were fighting an entire species that had been optimized for warfare. The engagement ended with the complete destruction of the Zephyrian assault force and minimal damage to the actual industrial facilities. The humans had used their attackers as target practice while protecting the infrastructure they actually needed. It was a level of tactical sophistication that suggested they weren't just defending their world, they were using the invasion as an opportunity to field test weapons and tactics they had been developing for decades. Admiral Kethvar received the after-action reports in stunned silence. In a single engagement, he had lost more ships than some previous conquests had cost in total. And the humans were celebrating the victory by broadcasting detailed analyses of Zephyrian tactical failures across their global communications networks, sharing information that would make future attacks even more difficult. "Sir," his intelligence officer reported, "we've intercepted human military communications. They're calling this engagement a successful field test of what they term total war doctrine." "Total war?" "Sir, it appears to be a human concept involving the complete mobilization of civilian populations for military purposes. Every human is considered a combatant, every facility is considered a military target, and every resource is dedicated to destroying the enemy. They're not fighting to protect their civilization, they're fighting to eliminate ours." Kethvar studied the tactical analyses flowing in from around the planet. Similar engagements were occurring everywhere his forces made contact with human defenders. The humans weren't just resisting. They were hunting his ships with coordination and tactical skill that suggested decades of preparation. "How long have they been planning this?" he asked. His tactical officer consulted the intelligence reports. "Sir, based on the sophistication of their preparations, we estimate they began serious planning for alien invasion scenarios approximately 60 years ago. But their fundamental military doctrine appears to be much older. They've been refining these tactics through conflicts with each other for millennia. 60 years of preparation, 3,000 years of evolution as apex predators, and a fundamental approach to warfare that treated annihilation of the enemy as the only acceptable outcome." For the first time in his career, Admiral Kethvar began to wonder if the Zephyrian Empire had made a critical error in targeting this small blue world. But it was too late to reconsider. The humans had made it clear that this would end with either the complete destruction of the invasion fleet or the complete destruction of their world. And they seemed remarkably confident about which outcome was more likely. The tipping point came 68 days into what Zephyrian military historians would later classify as the Sol System catastrophe. Admiral Kethvar was reviewing casualty reports when his communications officer announced incoming transmission from Fleet Admiral Morgeth himself. The Supreme Commander's image materialized in the holographic display, his four eyes blazing with barely controlled fury. "Admiral Kethvar, explain to me how a primitive species with chemical propulsion technology has destroyed 40% of your fleet." Kethvar had been dreading this conversation. "Sir, our intelligence assessments were incomplete. These humans have capabilities that don't correlate with their apparent technological level." "Capabilities?" Morgeth's voice dripped with contempt. "Are you telling me that primitives who still burn fossil fuels have military capabilities that challenge the Zephyrian Empire?" "Sir, they've been studying us for decades. They know our tactics, our technology, our weaknesses, and they've been preparing specifically for this conflict since before we knew they existed." Morgeth's laugh was harsh and bitter. Impossible. No species prepares for conquest by superior forces. They prepare for conflicts within their own technological parameters. What the fleet admiral couldn't understand was that humans were unique in the galaxy. They were the only species that had assumed hostile alien contact was inevitable and had spent generations preparing for asymmetric warfare against technologically superior enemies. While other civilizations dreamed of peaceful first contact, humans had planned for war. Sir, I'm transmitting our complete tactical analysis. I recommend immediate withdrawal and strategic reassessment. Withdrawal. Morgeth's expression shifted to cold fury. Admiral, the Zephyrian Empire has never withdrawn from a conquest. Ever. You will complete this operation or face execution for treason. The transmission ended, leaving Kethvar alone with the knowledge that his superior would rather see the entire fleet destroyed than admit that humans might represent a threat to Zephyrian supremacy. But Fleet Admiral Morgeth had made a critical error. He had assumed that this conversation was private. The humans had been monitoring Zephyrian communications since the first day of the invasion, and General Sarachun had heard every word. 12 hours later, Kethvar received a transmission that would change the course of the war. Admiral, General Chen's voice was calm and professional. We intercepted your conversation with your superior. We understand your position. Kethvar was too tired and too defeated to be surprised by the security breach. What do you want, General? To offer you a choice. You can continue following orders that will result in the complete destruction of your fleet and the deaths of every Zephyrian under your command. Or you can listen to what we've learned about your empire during our 68 days of combat. What could you possibly have learned? That you're not the real threat, Admiral. Your empire is. The transmission continued, and what General Chen revealed made Kethvar's blood run cold. The humans hadn't just been studying Zephyrian military tactics. They had been reverse engineering Zephyrian technology, analyzing communication protocols, and building detailed profiles of the Empire's political and military structure. We've been monitoring your communications with the Imperial Core worlds, Chen explained. We know about the rebellion brewing in the outer territories. We know about the economic strain of maintaining control over 47 star systems. We know about the growing dissatisfaction among your conquered species. And we know that your empire is far more fragile than it appears. Kethvar's worst fears were being confirmed by an enemy who seemed to understand his own civilization better than he did. Most importantly, Admiral, we know that you're not monsters. Your personal communications reveal an officer who takes no pleasure in conquest, who grieves for the species your empire has destroyed, and who has spent his career trying to minimize civilian casualties during planetary subjugations. That last observation hit harder than any kinetic weapon. Kethvar had indeed spent decades trying to make conquest as humane as possible, believing that the Zephyrian Empire brought order and civilization to primitive worlds. The humans had somehow identified his personal psychological profile through communication intercepts. We're offering you an alternative, Admiral. Help us, and we'll help you. Help you do what? In the Zephyrian Empire. The audacity of the proposal was breathtaking. A species that had never left their own solar system was offering to help destroy a galactic empire that had endured for 3 millennia. It should have been laughable, but Kethvar had seen what humans could do when they set their minds to destruction. Explain. Your empire succeeds because it fights species that aren't prepared for warfare. You've never fought a species that considers warfare to be their primary area of expertise. You've never fought a species that views the complete annihilation of their enemies as a moral imperative. And you've never fought a species that has the technological capability to reverse engineer your weapons and improve them. What Chen revealed next changed everything. The humans hadn't just been defending themselves for 68 days, they had been building. Every captured Zephyrian weapon had been analyzed, improved, and mass-produced. Every destroyed Zephyrian ship had provided components for human weapon systems. Every tactical engagement had been a learning experience that made them more dangerous. We now have functional plasma weapons energy shields, and faster-than-light communication systems, Chun continued. But unlike your empire, we've built them to be manufactured quickly, cheaply, and in vast quantities. We've weaponized our entire industrial civilization. Kethvar realized with growing horror that the humans had been using his invasion fleet as an involuntary research and development program. But that's just the beginning, Admiral. We've also been developing something your empire has never encountered: offensive faster-than-light capability. This was impossible. FTL technology was the foundation of Zephyrian military superiority. No primitive species could master such complex systems in mere months. We've reverse-engineered your navigation systems and propulsion technology, but we've applied human engineering principles. If it works, build 1,000 of them as quickly as possible. While your empire builds a few perfect ships over many years, we build many functional ships in a few months. The tactical implications were staggering. If humans had achieved faster-than-light capability, they were no longer confined to their solar system. They could take the war to the Zephyrian Empire. Here's what we're proposing, Admiral. You provide us with detailed intelligence on Imperial military installations, command structures, and defensive capabilities. In exchange, we'll provide transportation back to Imperial space for you and any of your personnel who want to join us. Together, we'll give your conquered species the tools they need to free themselves. Kethvar felt the weight of 3,000 years of Imperial history pressing down on him. The Zephyrian Empire wasn't just a military force. It was the foundation of galactic order, the force that prevented chaos and warfare between species. Without it, the galaxy would descend into endless conflict. General, you don't understand the consequences of what you're suggesting. The Empire maintains peace between hundreds of species across dozens of star systems. Without Imperial control, there would be wars everywhere. Chen's response revealed the fundamental difference between human and Zephyrian thinking. Admiral, there are already wars everywhere. Your empire has been conducting a 3,000-year war of conquest. The difference is that you've been the only ones allowed to fight back. She paused, letting that concept sink in. We're not proposing chaos, Admiral. We're proposing justice. Every species your empire has conquered deserves the same chance we've had. The chance to defend themselves with their own hands, using their own judgment, fighting for their own freedom. The transmission included detailed tactical plans that made Kethvar's tactical officers pale. The humans hadn't just reverse-engineered Zephyrian technology. They had improved it. Their proposed assault on Imperial core worlds would use Zephyrian weapon systems that were more advanced than anything the Empire currently deployed. But the most disturbing element of their plan wasn't the technology, it was the strategy. The humans intended to give advanced weapons to every species the Zephyrians had conquered and let them fight their own wars of liberation. It was a plan that would turn the galaxy into a battlefield, but it would be a battlefield where everyone had the chance to win. We're not asking you to betray your people, Admiral, Chen concluded. We're asking you to help them become something better than conquerors. Help us build a galaxy where strength comes from cooperation rather than domination. Kethvar stared at the tactical displays, showing the remains of his once mighty fleet. 40% casualties against a species that had never fought anyone but themselves. What would happen when humans encountered the less militarily capable species that formed the bulk of the Empire? The answer was obvious. The Empire would fall, not to superior technology or overwhelming force, but to an idea the humans had been perfecting for millennia, that freedom was worth any sacrifice, and that any enemy could be defeated if you were willing to pay the price. For the first time in his career, Admiral Kethvar found himself considering treason, not against the Zephyrian people, but against the system that had turned them into the galaxy's most efficient killers. The humans were offering him a chance to help end 3,000 years of conquest and replace it with something that had never existed in recorded galactic history, a civilization based on cooperation between equals rather than domination of the weak. It was terrifying. It was unprecedented. It was completely contrary to everything he had been trained to believe about galactic order. And after 68 days of watching humans turn warfare into an art form, Keth Var was beginning to think it might actually be possible. 2 years after the first human ship entered Zephyrian space, the galaxy was unrecognizable. Admiral Keth Var, now calling himself Admiral Keth Var of the Free Fleet, stood on the bridge of the Terran Liberation, a ship that perfectly embodied everything that had changed. The hull was Zephyrian, captured during the Sol System campaign. The weapons were human-designed improvements on Zephyrian plasma technology. The crew was a mixture of former Zephyrian officers and liberated species from across the galaxy. And the mission was something that would have been incomprehensible 3 years earlier, delivering advanced weapons to a species fighting for independence from the empire that Keth Var had once served. The target was Kepler, 442b, homeworld of the Zelnathi, a peaceful species that had been conquered 800 years ago and had been providing the empire with rare minerals ever since. Intelligence reports indicated that the local Zephyrian garrison was small and poorly equipped. The Empire had never considered the possibility that the Zelnathi might rebel. That was about to change. Admiral, reported Commander Sarah Park, the human officer who served as his tactical coordinator, were receiving transmissions from the planetary resistance. They're ready to proceed. Keth Var nodded. The pattern had become routine over the past 2 years. Human intelligence networks would identify species ready to fight for their freedom. The Free Fleet would deliver weapons and tactical advisors, and within months another world would throw off Zephyrian rule. It was a process that was accelerating as word spread through the underground networks that connected oppressed species across the galaxy. The humans had not only revolutionized warfare, they had revolutionized revolution itself. Begin the operation, Keth Var ordered. What happened next demonstrated why the Zephyrian Empire was collapsing faster than its leadership could comprehend. The Zelnathi had been peaceful before conquest, but 800 years of oppression had taught them patience, planning, and, most importantly, they had learned from human tactical manuals that had been distributed through resistance networks. The garrison on Kepler, 442b, consisted of 200 Zephyrian troops equipped with standard Imperial weapons and supported by 3 attack craft. Under normal circumstances, this would have been more than sufficient to maintain control over a population of 50 million nonviolent beings. But these were no longer normal circumstances. The Zelnathi struck simultaneously at 17 locations across their homeworld, using weapons that had been manufactured in hidden facilities using blueprints provided by human engineers. The attack wasn't just coordinated, it was perfectly synchronized, striking every Imperial installation at the exact moment when defensive systems would be least effective. Within 6 hours, the Imperial presence on Kepler, 442b, had been completely eliminated. No negotiations, no prolonged siege, no massive casualties among the civilian population. Just swift, efficient elimination of occupying forces using tactics that combined Zelnathi knowledge of their own terrain with human expertise in asymmetric warfare. Commander Park monitored the operation from the Terran Liberation, coordinating with Zelnathi commanders who had spent months studying human military doctrine. Admiral, planetary liberation is complete. Casualties: 0 among Zelnathi forces, total elimination of Imperial garrison. Keth Var had seen this pattern repeated dozens of times, but it still amazed him. The humans hadn't just taught other species how to fight. They had taught them how to fight smart. Every liberation was swift, decisive, and conducted with minimal collateral damage. It was warfare as surgical precision rather than overwhelming force. But the real revolution wasn't in the tactics, it was in what happened after the fighting stopped. Admiral, Park continued, the Zelnathi are requesting technological packages for defensive systems and industrial development. They're also asking for representatives to attend the next Galactic Freedom Council meeting. This was the part that would have been truly incomprehensible to the old Zephyrian Empire. The humans weren't conquering liberated worlds. They were helping them become independent, self-sufficient, and capable of defending themselves. The Galactic Freedom Council was a loose confederation of liberated species that shared technology, coordinated mutual defense, and maintained the communication networks that made further liberations possible. It was everything the Empire claimed to be, but had never actually achieved. A galactic civilization based on cooperation between equals rather than domination by superiors. Approve the requests, Kethvar ordered, and transmit the standard welcome package. The welcome package was another human innovation. Instead of demanding tribute or establishing control structures, newly liberated worlds received technological gifts, advanced manufacturing systems, defensive weapons, communication networks, and, most importantly, educational materials that taught them how to help other species achieve their own freedom. The humans had turned liberation into a self-perpetuating process. As the Terran Liberation prepared to jump to its next target, Kethvar received a priority transmission from Earth. General Chen's image appeared in the holographic display, but she was no longer wearing the uniform of a planetary defense force. Her new title was Coordinator of Galactic Liberation Operations, and she was calling from the headquarters that had been established in Earth's former United Nations building. Admiral, she said, we've received intelligence from our assets in the Imperial Core. Fleet Admiral Morgeth has been removed from command. The Imperial Council is in chaos. 3 more core worlds have declared independence, and the remaining Imperial forces are consolidating around Zephyria Prime. Kethvar felt a complex mixture of satisfaction and sadness. The Empire was dying, but it was taking with it 3,000 years of Zephyrian culture and history. Not all of it had been evil. Much of it had represented genuine attempts to create order and stability in a chaotic galaxy. What's the status of the remaining Imperial forces? Approximately 60% of the original Imperial fleet remains under central command, but morale is collapsing. We're receiving defection requests daily from officers who want to join the liberation movement. Your former colleagues are realizing that fighting for freedom is more satisfying than fighting for conquest. This was perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the human revolution. They hadn't just defeated the Zephyrian Empire. They had convinced many of its own people to join them. Zephyrian officers who had spent their careers following orders were discovering the satisfaction of fighting for something they actually believed in. General, what's the status of the Terran fleet? Kethvar asked. Operational deployment is at maximum capacity. We've established shipyards in 12 liberated systems, all producing vessels based on improved Imperial designs. Current estimates put our combined fleet strength at approximately 4 times the remaining Imperial forces. 4 times. In 2 years, a species that had never left their solar system had built a fleet that outnumbered the forces of a 3,000-year-old galactic empire. It was a demonstration of what human industry could accomplish when it was focused on a single objective. But the numbers didn't tell the complete story. The new fleet wasn't just larger than Imperial forces. It was better. Human engineering had improved on every aspect of Zephyrian technology, making ships that were faster, more maneuverable, better armed, and far less expensive to build. Quality and quantity had been combined in ways the Empire had never imagined. Admiral, Chun continued, the Council has approved the final operation. We're ready to proceed with liberation of Zephyria Prime. Kethvar had been expecting this moment, but it still felt surreal. The liberation of the Imperial homeworld would effectively end the Zephyrian Empire as a political entity. Everything his people had built over 3 millennia would be swept away and replaced by human ideals of freedom and cooperation. General, I need to ask you something I've been wondering about for 2 years. Why are you doing this? Your world is safe. The Imperial threat to Earth has been eliminated. You could stop here and live in peace. Chen's smile was the same one that had terrified Zephyrian officers during the Sol System campaign. Friendly, but absolutely implacable. Admiral, you still don't understand what makes humans different from every other species you've encountered. We don't fight for survival, we don't fight for territory, and we don't fight for conquest. We fight for ideas. and the idea that every sentient being deserves freedom is worth any sacrifice. She paused, her expression becoming more serious. Besides, we've learned something interesting about our own history from studying your empire's records. For thousands of years, we fought each other because we had no external threats to unite against. Now we have something better, a common cause that can unite not just humanity, but every species in the galaxy. We're not just liberating worlds, Admiral. We're creating the first truly free galactic civilization. The transmission ended, leaving Kethvar alone with thoughts that would have been treasonous just 3 years earlier. The humans were right. The Zephyrian Empire had maintained order through fear and dominance, but it had never achieved what the liberation movement was creating: genuine cooperation based on shared values rather than imposed control. Admiral, Commander Park reported, we're receiving a transmission from Zephyria Prime. It's addressed to you personally. The holographic display showed a figure Kethvar recognized with shock: Admiral Velgoth, his former second-in-command, and one of the most loyal officers in the Imperial fleet. Kethvar, Velgoth said, I'm transmitting from the surface of our homeworld. The Imperial Council has collapsed. The remaining fleet commanders are split between those who want to fight to the death and those who want to negotiate surrender. But there's a third option, and we wanted to discuss it with you before the final battle begins. Kethvar leaned forward, intrigued despite himself. We've been studying the reports from liberated worlds, and we've seen what the humans offer to species who join their coalition voluntarily. They don't demand subjugation or tribute. They offer partnership, technological advancement, and genuine autonomy. Many of us are wondering, what if Zephyria itself chose liberation? The audacity of the idea was staggering. The Imperial homeworld voluntarily joining the coalition that had destroyed their empire. It would be the ultimate validation of human ideals, proof that their revolution was based on inspiration rather than intimidation. The question, old friend, is whether you think the humans would accept us as equals rather than conquered enemies. Kethvar found himself smiling for the first time in months. After everything he had seen over the past 2 years, he knew exactly what the human answer would be. 3 months later, Admiral Kethvar stood in the same United Nations Assembly Hall where General Chun had first addressed the Zephyrian Empire. But this time, he was addressing the Galactic Freedom Council as the representative of the newest member species, the Zephyrians themselves. The Empire was dead. The galaxy was free. And, for the first time in 3,000 years, the most powerful military force in known space was fighting to protect freedom rather than destroy it. The humans had not only conquered everything, they had made everything worth conquering.